All right, guys, we just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we do a preview and prediction for the 2023 Iowa State Cyclones. Looking at this coaching staff, Matt Campbell is back, 46-42 record through 7 seasons. Nathan Scheelhaus takes over as offensive coordinator. He's been on the staff since 2018. The former Illinois quarterback releases Tom Manning, who was let go this offseason. He runs a spread attack. And then John Heacock, he's been with Matt Campbell since 2014, the Toledo days. He's a very good defensive play caller. Cyclones have returned 16 starters in hopes of a bounce-back season, looking to get back to the top of the Big 12. Looking at this offense, last year was a tough season, as expected. They lost a lot of talent, especially under center. Hunter Deckers comes in, though, replaces Brock Purdy, who started the last 4 years. Up and down debut season, was hesitant to pull the trigger at times. Pretty sharp release, though. Showcased good rip on intermediate throws, often throws too high, causing wide receivers to make acrobatic catches, inconsistent accuracy and decisions. Hunter Deckers, I believe he was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, 6'3", 206. As inconsistent as he was a season ago, Nick, this offense would have been completely lost without him. 19 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, top of the 3,000-yard mark. I think Deckers is ready to take that next step in hopes of getting this offense back to, top 30, top 50 levels in terms of yards per game. It was not pretty overall. 20.2 points per contest. That was 113th in college football. Tough year for this offense all around, but I think with Deckers at the helm, they have some potential here.
There is some positive Deckers, and there's certainly some negatives. 3,000 yards passing is not a bad number for sure. 66% completion percentage, solid. 19 TDs, but 14 interceptions. Struggles with ball control, a little sloppy with it, overthrows players, underthrows players. Just has a little too much zip on it sometimes and turns the ball over. The 14 interceptions is a number that's got to go down. But overall, I think Deckers is a solid quarterback with high upside, nice potential here. And if they can kind of focus and cut down on those turnovers, considering his size at 6'3", 206, is not a bad quarterback to have in the Big 12.
They do have 4-star quarterback J.J. Cole waiting in the wings. I know they're very excited for him. So I don't think Matt Campbell will be too hesitant to make a change if one calls for it. Looking at the portal, though, they lost 4 guys. Running back Deion Sanders to Rhode Island. They added 2. Arlen Harris, another running back from Stanford, was the biggest add. So not much done for this team in the portal. The biggest news, though, they lose wide receiver Xavier Hutchinson, Trevor Downing at center. Those are the only 2 starters that depart. They returned 9 starters. They were 40th in FBS on third downs a season ago. That was one thing that was certainly impressive for them. So they found themselves in short yardage situations often. Jarrell Brock lacks speed and strength, but he keeps the wheels turning. A typical ISU running back with toughness, has some good moves at the point of attack, 6', 220. This is a guy that was just an average player a season ago. They're going to want to get back to running the football, Nick. This was a team that was 114th with 107.3 rushing yards per contest a season ago. This is a team that's produced guys like Breece Hall, David Montgomery. They've put legit backs in the NFL that produced. Matt Campbell and this group, they know how to coach running backs, and Brock showcases that with that toughness. What does this offense need to do to get some more yards on the ground? Because that's what they want to make their money.
They certainly need to hand the ball off to Brock as much as possible. He only had 99 carries this past season, good for 444 yards and 4.5 yards per carry, plus the 3 scores for him. I want to see Brock get the bulk of the load here. Got to stick to the running game. They produce a lot of talented running backs that have gone to the NFL. They got to focus, get those offensive linemen in shape, and get them kind of making those holes and get those blocks in there. Because I think Brock's a very talented back. I like the speed with him. There's a lot of potential with him. Very solid player. I know you say he lacked the speed. I think there is some speed there. He does fight. He fights at the point of attack, takes hits rough, right, and center. So I think if you can focus on the running game, get him back into that sort of rhythm, they could easily get Brock over 1,000 yards this season. That's really kind of the key to success for this offense.
Of course, Hutchinson departs, a possession warrior. Jalen Noel, this is a player I circled last year to be an immediate impact player. And he did exactly what I thought he would do. They really fed him. It wasn't utilized much deep. Really just an underneath guys, a bigger size, quick twitch slot option, some good open field speed. Jalen Noel's really going to have to take that next step this year. Looking at the rest of this receiving group, Dimitri Stanley enters his 6th year, a modest producer for them, quality tight end in Easton Dean, athletic Deshaun Hanukkah, who will be big for them. EQU transfer Jaden Higgins, he had 750-plus yards and 10 touchdowns last year. 2022 4-star Greg Gaines, true freshman Kai Black may need to get on the field. A very thin unit with limited depth, but they do return the 2nd through 4th leading pass catchers, which is certainly, good and important. But when the top receiver that departs was such an important part of this offense, things are definitely going to be a little hairy for this team early on.
I agree. I think this is a nice wide receiving core. There are some good pieces here. Knowles, a really talented player. 600 yards receiving last season, 3 scores for him. Stanley, a good leader in the locker room. I think Dean's a solid tight end. He only had 10 receptions last year. If he gets some more targets there, I like his size, 2 scores for him as well. I think this wide receiving core, there is a lot of upside here, but a lot of these guys are young. It's good they're returning guys. They have some experience working this offense, but when you lose a guy like Hutchins, That's a tough loss. I mean, he is Hutchinson. Sorry, he is such a talented wide receiver. Obviously, we saw that when he got drafted in the NFL. So losing a guy like that, it's going to be tough to replace that production.
Look at this offensive line. No, Matt Campbell last year was very high on this unit, but they didn't power the way to that running game. Again, 107 yards per game. But he likes what they have in terms of raw talent and depth. Tyler Miller at tackle wasn't all that great. 31 pressures allowed. Jake Remsburg, a veteran at right tackle. Brady Peterson expected to make an impact at center. Garrett Hufford was a solid pass blocker. An overall average offensive line with some experience. Some good improvements need to be made. New offensive line coach Ryan Clanton from UNI, who's produced NFL offensive linemen preaching speed and more violent intentions. They need to get back to running the football with physicality from the backs, but most importantly, it's going to start with this offensive line. I think Clanton, the addition from Northern Iowa, a team that's really given the Cyclones headaches whenever they played over the last couple of years, he takes over the role. I think he's really going to come in and coach these guys up. Of course, he just put one of those guys in the first round of the NFL draft just 2 years ago. So I definitely think this is an underrated addition to really beef up this unit.
I think Clanton's a good hire. Offensive line coach, UNI is definitely known for producing some talented players in the offensive line, physical unit playing at the FCS level. I like the hire here. I think Miller, expect a big bounce back year for him. I think Remsburg's a solid piece overall. This is a decent offensive line. They got to create those holes to the running backs and then get back to that kind of ground and pound offense that Iowa State's known for.
Now looking at this defense, if you look at the numbers, 18th in points per game allowed, 4th in total yards, top 15 in passing yards and running yards allowed. The offense, they were not on the field a whole lot. The 725 plays on defense, those were the 6th fewest in college football, but they were the 7th best on third down. Certainly not skewed numbers like Air Force and Army, for example. They'll have very few plays, but their offense dominates time of possession. So those are skewed numbers. You don't see that with Iowa State. They lost 8 players in the portal, only picked up 1 in linebacker Zach Levitt from Missouri. They do return 7 starters. This is even only had 18 sacks. J.R. Singleton, Joey Peterson will need to step up admirably. 114th in turnover margin. These numbers, Nick, really don't make sense on how good this defense was considering how bad the offense was. Again, they just did not force turnovers one bit. They allowed only 1 run of 30-plus yards all season long. Rarely got beat downfield. Only 4 interceptions from the DBs. I'm just lost here on how this defense was able to produce last year. John Heacock really has this scheme figured out. I think he's mastered this 4-2-5. They did have Will McDonald last year. Didn't exactly produce at the level that I would have expected. These numbers, Nick, they're incredibly varying. Like no turnovers, but you get off the field. They allow no big plays despite playing a lot on the side of the ball. What am I looking at here?
It is absolutely bizarre. This is a tough defense, yet somehow they just do not capitalize on turnovers. They don't produce turnovers at all. 4th in the nation in yards per game is an incredible stat. 18th in points per game. Just at the 20 points per game mark is absolutely phenomenal. You look at this defense, pass yards per game, rush yards per game, all in the top 15 in the country. And the production isn't there. The leading tackler last year had below 100 tackles, only 71 total tackles for their leading tackler last year. Will McDonald, a guy who was drafted early in the NFL draft, he only had 36 total tackles. They lose that production. This is a team that's very physical. It seems like it's a by committee sort of defense. They all work together as one cohesive unit to get off the field quickly, force a ton of punts. A lot of 3 and outs that this defense forces. They get off the field. And overall, it's a talented defense that really, like I said, by committee, these guys all work together to produce as one big unit.
Not only did Will McDonald go to the NFL, MJ Anderson, they lost from the defensive line. They do return 2 solid run lane defenders in Isaiah Lee and Tyler Audium. Neither have overwhelming size, though, at linebacker. They lose the top 2 linebackers in Colby Reeder or Ryan Vance. But they get back the leading tackler in 5'11", 231, Gary Vaughn, who was a stout tackler and really good run defender for them. Will McLaughlin got on the field but was awful versus the run and as a tackler. Heacock is happy with the depth in the linebacking room. Of course, returning experience and production doesn't exactly preach the same thing, but he's with this football team every day, so I'm certainly going to take his word for it. This front 7 overall, Nick, when you look at the depth chart, there's not a lot there, and there's not a lot in terms of returning production or experience. But if I had to guess, they're probably going to find a way to be just as good this upcoming season.
They certainly know how to coach these guys up in Ames. They're going to be just as good as they were this past season. I think Gary Vaughn is a very good piece to have, returning 71 total tackles for him, 4.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. All right, he's your big returning production here, leading tackler last year. But outside of that, the production returning is just not great. It really kind of lacks in that defensive returning production. You can't really highlight a whole lot of pieces here. I think there are some talented pieces. But overall, it's going to be kind of just, like I said, by committee, next man up sort of mentality. They do that in Ames perfectly. They coach the defense to have that next man up mentality, focus on what you got to do, focus on your assignment, and to be play by committee over here. It really seems to work for the Cyclones.
Anthony Johnson's transition last year in the secondary was something I highlighted. He thrived in this unit, but he's gone now. TJ Tampa at corner, he was great in critical situations, cracks the ball well. he's good but inconsistent feet. He mirrors well underneath. Was a great run defender for them. TJ Tampa's certainly going to be a guy that wants to hunt down one of those all-conference teams this fall. Bayou Freiler, he was, as expected, a big impact player for them in all facets. He's obviously going to have to take over that role of Anthony Johnson. Miles Purchase, he was actually really good at limiting yards after catch as well. So I think the secondary is probably going to be the brightest group for this football team. Again, last year they didn't force many interceptions, only 4. And I think at least half of those came from TJ Tampa, actually. They have a good bit of experience and actually some returning production on the back end. So I certainly think that this 4-2-5, the 5 in the back, are really going to be the tone setters for them.
2 juniors in Purchase and Freiler that I like returning. These guys are some good veteran experience. They both played meaningful snaps in the past. Freiler, second leading tackle on the team, 68 total tackles. Purchase had 41 total tackles. TJ Tampa, he's good for tackles for loss. He had 5 tackles for loss this past season, 39 total tackles overall. So those 3 pieces right there, I like the production with them. 3 veterans that have been part of the program for a while now, good experience. This secondary unit's very solid.
No picks for TJ Tampa. It was 9 pass breakups, that is, so he was a big ball hawk for them. I think takeaways in the pass rush certainly need to improve. Top to bottom, Nick, when you look at talent on this defense, we only have 3 guys on the sheet because that's returning production is very limited here, but the defense will need to once again be a collectively tough, disciplined unit that stifles opponents, and it's hard to assume they won't be at least somewhat as decent as they were a season ago, and at least top 5 in their conference. On paper, the talent is just very far and thin. That's been the story of Matt Campbell's tenure, though, and guess what? This team has competed in the conference year after year. When they lose games outside of that TCU contest late last year, they rarely get blown out. They're always competing. I mean, look at Oklahoma. They blow this team out. I mean, the all-time record is absurd against the Sooners. And over the last number of seasons under Campbell, they've competed every single year with the Sooners. The top dogs in the conference do not faze them. So I'd expect that once again, especially with this defense.
Certainly that next man up mentality on the defense. Matt Campbell, he gets so much out of his poor talent. And it's not a knock on the guys, right? They're just not high-level recruits out of high school. These are very, undervalued players in sort of the high school recruiting sort of thing. He gets them out of there. Campbell just produces with these guys. They find a way week in, week out to produce. And the defense, I mean, the numbers are incredible. Like I said, 285.6 yards per game, 4th in the nation. Other numbers all top 20. This defense last year was great. Not a lot of returning production, but next man up mentality. They could certainly be a top 20 defense again this year.
Looking at the schedule preview and prediction, the underrated notion of Matt Campbell's tenure has been that this team always competes and rarely is out of games. The offense has impressive upside at quarterback and a few pass catchers, but to be effective, they'll need to see some big improvements on the O-line and more efficiency from the running back position. Defense was absurdly elite last season despite the lack of a pass rush and takeaways, but pure scheming and heart has been mind-blowing. Secondary has some pieces, but the guys will need to step up in the front 7 alongside Gary Van to see a repeat on that side of the ball. I'm going to go 7-5 here. I think this is a good but conservative prediction. I think they're going to start 4-0, and I do think they'll beat Oklahoma State at home. I think they'll take one off the Hawkeyes there, and will probably be a 3-0 ball game. I do think they'll upset TCU at home. Really wouldn't even be an upset. This team really competes in Ames. And then I see 2 wins on the road over the back 6 against the newcomers to the conference, Nick. That's about it for this football team. But a team like Iowa State is incredibly hard to predict. Very high ceiling for this type of team just because when you look at the paper, again, the talent's not great, but that heart and that scheming they play with, man, it's just something else.
It's tough to play at Jack Trice Stadium in Ames. I mean, just ask Oklahoma State that about 10 years ago when they had a chance to go to the BCS national title game. They lost on that famous Friday night. I mean, Iowa State, they got a fan base that's loud. That stadium's tough to play at. So certainly in any of these home games this season, you could certainly expect them to be very competitive. They could certainly potentially beat Texas or Kansas at home. I think 7-5, 8-4 is kind of right where this team belongs. They'll be in a bowl game this year after a disappointing 4-8 season last year. Matt Campbell has stuck to the process. He continues to stick it out and ride it out, and this team produces, and they get a lot of the production here. The schedule, it's got some tough games on there, but it's also not the most difficult in the world. They certainly could push 9 wins if they get lucky on one of those road games at Baylor, at Kansas State, at Oklahoma. Overall, this is a team that is not great on paper, but it's a lot of fun to watch. They play with a ton of heart. They put a ton of energy into it, and they could beat you on any given Saturday.
Hosting Kansas and Texas in November could certainly be daunting for those 2 opponents. It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing another Cyclones season. Matt Campbell's building a great program out there. He's committed to the cause, and they're very rewarded for it.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.